Give a little overview. Let's hear it for Beau Whitney, everybody. Beau Whitney.
So I want to thank ICBC for hosting this event, and I've been really impressed by not only the quality of the speakers, but also the quality of the participants at the conference. So hats off to you guys. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of you today. There'll be a little bit of overlap from the previous presenter, but he seemed a little bit preventer because he was telling it like it is. But so my name is Beau Whitney. I'm the senior economist at New Frontier Data. And I've been in the industry about 5 years now. And never in my wildest dreams did I think that as an economist, I'd be talking about weed in Berlin. I mean, it's just phenomenal. But I think that's representative of just the pace of the transformation of the cannabis industry. So today I'm going to talk about a global cannabis outlook. I'm going to first talk high level and then pare it down into the European Union. I'm going to talk about higher THC cannabis, adult use and medical. But I also want to touch upon this emerging industry of the industrial cannabis as well. So a little bit about New Frontier Data. New Frontier Data is an independent technology-driven analytics company, and we're specialized in the cannabis industry. We offer vetted data that is actionable, it's good business intelligence, and it looks at risk management as well. We're 4 years old, and we have, in that 4 years, we've been cited in over 82 countries with our data. We have a media reach of 7 billion impressions. So we've really been considered an authority on cannabis data. So the way that we get our data is that we reach into certain aspects of the industry, all aspects. So we get governmental data, NGO data, state and provincial regulator data, and then we also marry that with consumer data, ancillary data, and point-of-sale data. And we agglomerate all that data into a business intelligence portal called Equio, and then from there we can have consumers subscribe to the portal, or we can do custom report and advisory services. Some of our business partners and clients are some of the largest in the world, from Bloomberg to Boston Consulting Group, but we've also touched upon even the smallest of actors in the space, because we want to do our best to look at all facets and all channels of the market. So over 60 countries around the world have now legalized either medical cannabis or industrial hemp. And so when you, as operators and investors, even though it may be a local issue for you, you really have to think global about this. The previous presenter talked about things going on in South Africa, also, advancements in Mexico. So there's this pace of legalization that's sweeping the globe. And so this is a real exciting time to be in this industry. So in terms of total demand, roughly, based upon our analysis, roughly 6% of the adults in the world have consumed cannabis in the last year. So that translates into almost 300 million consumers. If you look at Germany right now, arguably 20 to 40,000 patients have got prescription in the last year. So even in Germany, there's this huge untapped market that's associated with cannabis. So cannabis this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of overall demand. Now, some continents have higher usage rates than others. It's not uncommon for consumers in legal markets to have higher percentage of usage rates. Africa has a long tradition of cannabis use and cultivation and the like. But Europe is right about where the average is across the globe, 6% versus 5.9%. Now, how does that translate into dollars? Well, we are in the process of publishing a global report on cannabis. It's due out next month. Our forecast for the total globe with just higher THC cannabis, not including industrial hemp, is $344 billion. And it ranges from 200 billion to 500 billion, but the midpoint is right around $344 billion. So there's just, once again, it's this huge market that is relatively untapped. So as consumers transition from illicit to legal, there'll be this greater opportunity for you as you get into this market. Europe is the third largest, based upon our forecast, at $68 billion. Asia is just this tremendous market. A lot of it's population driven, but it's also usage driven as well. Now, although we're in Europe, a lot of the speakers have talked about the Canadian market and the US market, and I've seen a lot of eye rolls from the Europeans present here. But it's because there's this legal market, and it's because of the size of the market that it's setting the precedent for other countries to follow. So Canada is making good inroads on their legalization. It's not without its weaknesses, but definitely it's setting the stage for others to follow. But in 2019, $16 billion of legal sales in Canada and the US combined, and that's growing to $32 billion by 2025. So, and that doesn't even include some of the emerging states like New York, New Jersey, et cetera. So the growth there is phenomenal. And so you can ride the tide now in order to capture larger markets later. Now, because there's this popularity in the US, because there's this large market in the US and Canada, investment funds have been investing tremendous amounts into the cannabis space. So since 2015, over $19 billion have been invested in North America. Now, how does that apply to Europe? Well, the $19 billion is being accumulated and then redeployed into other markets like Europe, like Africa and Latin America. But there's a couple of notable items that the pace of this investment is accelerating. Almost $14 billion of investment just last year alone. And it was driven primarily by some of these large players in the space, such as Constellation Brands, their investment into Canopy growth, and then Altria's investment into Kronos. So combined there, it's almost $6 billion of investment. And what that means is that big actors, big players are coming into the space. So if you're a small actor that's already established, then you really should have an exit strategy associated with this so that either you can be acquired by the large actors or that you can understand where you're at relative to the market. So I know a lot of people say, well, why should I have an exit strategy when I haven't even begun operations? But it's really important to have that already established so that when the market turns or commoditization of prices occur, then you'll know where you stand and you can either get out or join forces with others. So in terms of the European market, like I mentioned, $68 billion of the total addressable market, that's illicit and legal combined. I listed the top 15 markets here, and Germany ranks roughly third, almost $10 billion. Now, all these numbers are in dollars, so I'm just moving forward for the presentation, but at $10 billion, that's a sizable market. It's relatively untapped, it's only medical, but that's a huge opportunity. And so this is the attractiveness because there's large markets, there's large potential and relatively untapped. That's why a lot of folks are preparing to enter into this space, either from North America, Latin America, or Africa. Now, one of the ways that companies can differentiate themselves is through technology. either to drive efficiencies or differentiation. And technology is entering into this space at a massive pace. And it's disrupting a number of sectors, and all sectors actually. So between cultivation, processing, delivery mechanisms, and data, a lot of these are being invested in and disrupting. So you need to be aware as a investor and as a operator that these technological advances are occurring so that you can keep pace with them. Now, a lot of these technology innovations are because the consumer behavior is changing as well. So New Frontier Data just published one of the largest consumer data reports in the history of cannabis. And it's US and Canada based. But what we did is we did this consumer survey, and then we married it with $6 billion of transactional data to ascertain what the consumer preferences were and then where they sit relative to the overall usage spectrum. So we've identified 9 different archetypes of consumers, and each one uses for different reasons. Each one uses different amounts, and they have different preferences in terms of delivery mechanisms. And so this is important to know as operators, because if you're targeting one product to the wrong archetype, then you're not going to be successful. So understanding the consumer is critically important. And now for the first time, we've got the data to show the preferences and the like. Now, there's no longer just this medical and recreational users. And so this is a deeper dive into the consumer behavior and preference. And so there's nuances associated with this. Now, it's interesting, based upon the survey results, it's interesting that the reasons that consumers are using are not just for social. It's more so for wellness and health. And this is very interesting for me because in yesterday's presentations on the medical side, there was a lot of data being presented on the impact that cannabis has on the human body. And that aligns almost identically to what consumers are using cannabis for relaxation, stress relief, sleep, etc. And so this was surprising compared to what we were talking about yesterday. But if you look at this, only 19% use cannabis just because they were bored, or wanted to do it socially. Now, in addition to that, cannabis has medical applications, and 73% of the consumers that are surveyed actually have used cannabis as a substitute for other drugs. And this is showing up not only in consumer patterns, but also in federal budgets and federal spending on healthcare, et cetera. And so other countries are interested in this development because they want to look at their healthcare expenditures, like Germany, for example, and adjust accordingly and support more cannabis use rather than opioid use, as just an example. But 94% of the consumers surveyed said that when they used it for a medical reason, that there was some improvement. And so this is just another example of why there's a benefit to doing more of a deeper dive into the cannabis space. Now, I mentioned, here's some data from the US, but I mentioned that as cannabis is used as a substitute for other medicine, they're reducing the healthcare costs at the federal level. So in this example, 11% reduction in governmental pain medicine spending for healthcare. So other countries are seeing this result in the United States, and as a result, they're looking at this as a way to adjust their healthcare costs and address budget deficits and the like. So as more and more research is out there and more usage behaviors change, so does the demand for the cannabis products. And originally, especially in the United States, this was a flower play, and a majority of the demand was in flower form, pre-rolls, et cetera. But as delivery mechanisms and technology came in, innovation, then there was different product offerings, different delivery mechanisms, and as a result, the consumer preference and purchasing patterns changed. So, over 3-year period, demand for flower went down 39% in the United States, whereas there were increases in concentrates, edibles, and other delivery mechanisms. So there's a fundamental shift away from flower and into derivative products. And this isn't just a US phenomena, this is a phenomena that exists in all the cannabis markets. So consumer preferences change as well based upon other disrupting factors. And so we've listed 5 here. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but essentially, as legal access expands, as social acceptance increases, then the changes and preferences of the consumer adjust to the environment. And so this is a transformational event where consumers change their preferences, change what they consume. And as business owners and as investors, you have to be aware of these disruptive factors so that you're not left behind. And so New Frontier data can provide that level of granularity in the data so that you can keep pace and understand the markets better. So I've talked a lot about higher THC cannabis. So I'd like to switch gears a little bit to lower THC industrial cannabis as well. So because this is a big market that is rather underappreciated. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this as well, because there's a lot of business that's conducted in industrial hemp in Europe. New Frontier Data just acquired the Hemp Business Journal. It's a very respected journal in the United States. And so we brought on expertise for industrial hemp. And so our forecast here shows that on a global basis, there's a $3 billion global market right now that's occurring. This is a legal market, and it's increasing. It's doubling essentially over the next 2 years. So, and Europe is the biggest driver right now in industrial hemp, but there's emerging markets that are coming in that could disrupt or displace Europe as one of the more mature markets. So just to level set, the bright shiny object these days is CBD. And so everybody is focusing in on the CBD market, but there's industrial applications, consumer applications, textiles, food, supplements, and the like. And for example, BMW uses industrial hemp on the interior of their cars. So there's this huge industrial application associated with it that nobody's really talking about, but there's a huge market well beyond the CBD play. So I've got a few more slides, so got about 5 more minutes. So hemp industry in Europe is farther along. Now, these are global numbers, but they're $1 billion market in textiles, $800 million, and CBD for just hemp-derived CBD, almost $800 million in industrial applications. But if you look closely at this chart, you'll see that a majority of this demand is being satisfied by the European market. But as the US reacts to legalization of industrial hemp, look for the US to start flexing its muscle. Now, there's opportunities there that the Europeans can take advantage of in the US market. So whereas a lot of other countries are targeting the European market for market entry strategies, the Europeans, with their expertise in industrial hemp, can take advantage of the opportunities in the US market as well. And the hemp market in Europe is very diverse. Currently, it's mainly on the industrial, like I mentioned, and CBD, but the market is shifting over more towards consumer products and wellness brands. And and that's just a small percentage of the current revenues derived from industrial hemp in Europe. Now, I talked about a little bit about the demand for hemp products, but it's interesting on the supply side, a lot of the supply of industrial hemp products is coming from China and Canada right now, with France also being a distant third in the space. But look for increases in cultivation, not only in the European Union, but in places such as Africa and Asia and South America. And that in itself will have an effect on pricing and the like, commoditization of pricing. So as business owners in the hemp space, you're going to need to be aware of those outside influences on the localized market. So some key takeaways: 300 million consumers, huge opportunity. There's surging investment that is being deployed around the globe, but the CPG entrants, big tobacco, alcohol, pharma, are providing the liquidity for the advancement and development of the cannabis space. If you are an operator now, be sure to use technology, be sure to use data in order to drive efficiencies so you can keep pace with the competition. The European market is a target of a lot of suppliers from outside, but what you'll see in the coming years is that there's going to be a consolidation. But overall, just in sum right now, because I want to give some time for questions, this is a global market, 60 countries and then some. And you're here in Berlin, you're operating in Germany or France or Italy, what have you. You really have to think about the global aspect of this and adjust accordingly. So as you act local, you have to think global. Otherwise, you'll be left behind. And there's this tremendous opportunity that you want to take advantage of right now. So at that point, thank you very much for listening. I'll take a few questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Beau. Let's hear it for Beau. We have time for one or two quick questions. There's one over there. Please be brief, no rambling. We're trying to catch up. I know we started a little late. Everybody was a little, how do you say hungover in German?
Hey there, thanks for taking my question. In Canada, there's been some anecdotal evidence, fairly convincing, but still anecdotal, that people have been rejecting what they perceive as poor quality government weed and staying with their supplier. Do you see that the black market presents any challenges at this point, or has that ship sailed?
The way that I view the illicit market relative to legal market is not necessarily on quality. It's based upon price. We've done elasticity analysis, which means pricing sensitivity by the consumer. And the data is very convincing that if that consumers don't want to pay too much of a premium to do things legally. So as a result, if they're taxed too much, if there's too much of a price markup, they'll just revert back to the illicit market. So with respect to Canada, what's occurring there is that due to supply shortages and the like, the lack of access at the retail level, there's not enough supply, and so prices are high, especially with a $1 per gram tax. That's just asinine. So what it's doing is it's driving the behavior of the consumer back into the illicit market. So once prices commoditize and lower, and they're more price competitive relative to the illicit market, then you'll see more market conversions. The consumer conversion, I've modeled it. It's super easy to predict, and it's all based upon price.
All right, well, thank you very much. Let's hear it one more time. Beau Whitney, the VP from New Frontier Data. That was very informative, and we really appreciate you, brother. Thanks for coming in.